My daughter showed up at my beach house with her husband, 2 suitcases, and a plan. "We're staying," she announced before I could even say hello. Her husband looked around the property and started making demands. Breakfast at 4 a.m., quiet house, good coffee. I smiled and said nothing. They took my silence for agreement. The next morning at exactly 4 a.m., they got the wake-up call they never expected. Let me tell you how it happened. Not the short version, the one I gave the investigator, with its tidy timeline and its numbered exhibits. The real version, the one that starts 25 years before anyone rang my doorbell. Because nothing about that morning makes sense unless you understand what it took for me to be standing in that kitchen in the first place. At 54 years old, alone, with a spatula in my hand and a folder on the counter, and absolutely no intention of losing. I spent 23 years married to a man who never once raised his voice at me. I want to be precise about that, because when people hear how a marriage ended, they listen for the dramatic part. The shouting, the slammed door, there was none of that. My ex-husband was polite the way a closed door is polite. He simply believed, calmly and completely, that his opinions were facts and my feelings were scheduling conflicts. If I said I was tired, he explained why I shouldn't be. If I said I wanted to go back to work once our daughter started school, he asked with genuine puzzlement who exactly would run the house while I was off finding myself. He never forbade anything. He just made every alternative to his preference sound like a phase I was going through. It works, that method. It works slowly and it works well. By year 10, I had stopped suggesting restaurants because he always had a reason mine were wrong. By year 15, I had stopped driving on highways because he'd once said, offhand, that I got flustered at merges, and the sentence had installed itself in my hands. By year 20, I could not have told you a single thing I was good at that didn't involve maintaining the comfort of other people. I cooked beautifully. I kept a beautiful house. I raised a daughter who watched all of it and learned, the way children do, not from what we tell them, but from what we tolerate. The end, when it came, was not dramatic either. I was 49. He'd retired early and was home all day now, supervising. One Tuesday in March, he stood in the doorway of the kitchen while I made his lunch and corrected the way I was slicing a tomato. Not unkindly, instructionally. And I looked down at my own hands, on my own cutting board. In the kitchen I had cleaned every day for 2 decades. And I thought, with a clarity that felt almost chemical, I could do this alone. All of it. The cooking, the bills, the highway merges, the rest of my life. The only thing I couldn't do alone was be told how. The divorce took 14 months. I walked away with less money than I deserved and more clarity than I'd ever had. His lawyer was better than mine. I've made peace with that, mostly because what I got in the settlement turned out to matter less than what I got in the aftermath, which was the discovery. At 50, at an age when this society firmly believes a woman should be finished becoming anything, that I was just getting started. Here is what I did with the first 18 months of my freedom. I made a list of everything I knew how to do, and then I made a second list of everyone who might pay for it. 23 years of running a household to an impossible standard turns out to be a skill set. I knew hospitality the way a field surgeon knows anatomy, not from a textbook, from pressure. A friend of a friend connected me to a hospitality consulting firm that evaluated boutique hotels and vacation properties, and I talked my way into a trial contract by telling the managing partner the truth, that I had spent 2 decades anticipating the needs of the most demanding guest in the world, and unlike her other consultants, I had never once been allowed to bill for it. She laughed. Then she hired me. In 4 years, I evaluated 61 properties up and down the coast. I learned what people actually need from a place versus what they think they want versus what a brochure tells them to expect. I learned to walk into a building and read it, where the money had gone, where the corners had been cut, what the owner loved and what the owner had given up on. I got good. I got paid. And in my 3rd year of being paid, I did the thing I had quietly been planning since the day I left the lawyer's office with my diminished settlement and my enlarged sense of possibility. I bought a house on the water. I will not pretend it was grand. 3 bedrooms, a deck that needed work, floor-to-ceiling windows on the western wall that the inspector called an energy efficiency concern, and I called the entire point. It cost me nearly everything I had, and I signed the papers alone, with my own pen, on a Thursday morning, and the realtor said congratulations to you both out of habit, and then went red and apologized. And I told her there was no need. There was no both. That was the achievement. 3 years I'd lived there by the time my daughter's car pulled into the driveway. 3 years of making it mine in the unglamorous, accumulating way a place becomes yours. My yoga mat lived on the deck and was sun-faded on one side. My paintbrushes soaked in coffee mugs I kept meaning to wash. My romance novels lay face down on the arm of the couch, splayed open to whatever page the sunset had interrupted. I had a $40 coffee grinder I used every morning at 6 and a wine fridge with exactly 9 bottles in it, each one saved for an occasion I hadn't invented yet. I knew which floorboard sighed in the hallway. I knew what the fog did to the light in October. I cooked elaborate dinners for one, plated like a magazine, and ate them on the deck with my feet on the railing. And if you think that's a sad image, you have never spent 23 years cooking elaborate dinners for someone who critiqued them. It was a small life, deliberate, entirely mine. I'm telling you all of this, the mugs, the floorboard, the 9 bottles, because you need to understand what was actually on the table that week. Not real estate, not square footage. The first thing I had ever built with no one's permission. Now my daughter, she is 28 and I love her, and I am going to be honest about her anyway, because the honest version is the only one that explains what happened. My daughter grew up watching her father be certain and her mother be flexible, and of the two, she chose certainty. I don't blame her. Certainty looked like the winning team in our house. She learned early that the person who states a plan first usually gets the plan, and she carried that lesson out into the world like a passport. She wasn't cruel and she wasn't stupid. She was something more common and harder to fix. She was a person who had outsourced her judgment. All her life, she attached herself to whoever was most confident in the room and borrowed their certainty like a coat. In high school, it was a best friend who decided what they both wore. In college, it was a boyfriend who decided what she majored in. After the divorce, it was, for a while, her father, who decided I had blown up the family over a tomato. We'd repaired things, slowly, in the years since. Phone calls that started stiff and got easier. A visit each summer. She'd stand on my deck and say, "This place is so you, Mom," in a tone I could never quite parse. Pride or puzzlement or a little of both. I took what I could get. When you have spent 2 decades being managed, you learn not to manage other people. And so I let my daughter be exactly who she was and hoped proximity would teach her what lectures couldn't. Then, 14 months ago, the text started featuring a new name, a man. He worked in real estate investment. His phrasing, I'd learned, was always the acquisition space. He was older, established, decisive. "He plans everything, Mom," she texted me once. "You'd love him." And I remember sitting on my deck reading that and feeling a small cold draft go through the evening because I had spent 23 years with a man who planned everything. And "you'd love him" was not the conclusion I had drawn. I met him exactly twice. Once at a crowded birthday dinner for my daughter, where he gripped my hand and called me young lady, which is a thing men say to women my age when they want to be charming and have never once considered how it lands. Once at a brunch where he spent 40 minutes explaining the coastal property market to me who had spent 4 years being paid to evaluate coastal properties, and where my daughter glowed at him the entire time, the way she used to glow at the certain friend, the certain boyfriend, the certain father. 8 weeks after that brunch, on a Sunday morning, my phone buzzed and it was a group text. Me, her father, 2 of her cousins, a college roommate, a photo of 2 hands, a courthouse step, a ring. We did it. Small ceremony, just us. You know how we hate fuss. They did not hate fuss. Neither of them had ever met a fuss they didn't want catered. What they hated, I would understand later, was lead time. Lead time is when people ask questions. Lead time is when a mother with 4 years of professional due diligence experience Googles a son-in-law before the paperwork is signed instead of after. I called her. I said congratulations and meant a third of it. I asked if she was happy, and she said happier than I've ever been. And the terrible thing, the thing I have had to forgive myself for, is that I let it go. I told myself she's a grown woman. I told myself maybe certainty found a good host this time. I told myself the thing mothers of adult children tell themselves every single day, which is that the cord you cut doesn't come with a steering wheel. 10 months later, on a Tuesday in late August at 9:40 in the morning, a car door slammed in my driveway. I was on the deck with my coffee when I heard it. By the time I got to the front of the house, my daughter was already pulling a suitcase out of the trunk of a rented SUV, and her husband was standing in my driveway with his hands on his hips, looking up at my house the way a man looks at a horse he's thinking of buying. "Mom!" my daughter called, like this was a delight we had planned together. Surprise! It was 11 days into their honeymoon. I knew that because I'd received exactly 1 postcard-style text from a resort the week before. A photo of 2 cocktails, no message. Now here they were, 2 large suitcases and a garment bag on my doorstep. And before I had said one word, my daughter walked past me into the entryway, set her bag down at the foot of my staircase like she was returning home from a semester abroad, and said the sentence from which the entire rest of this story unspools. "We're staying, not can we. Not would it be okay. We're staying." Present tense, settled fact, weather report. And while I stood there processing it, she added, already moving toward my kitchen, "Hotels are so impersonal, and you always say life should embrace the unexpected." I had said that once, when she was 16, about auditioning for the school play. It is remarkable, the archival precision with which our children store our words and the creative liberty with which they deploy them. Her husband came through the door behind her, and here is where I want to slow down, because what he did in the next 90 seconds told me everything, and it took me a day to understand what I'd seen. He extended his hand and gave me a smile I recognized. Not from him, from work. It was a lobby smile, a renderings and projections smile. "It is such a pleasure to see you again," he said. "She talks about this place constantly. Expensive watch, custom shirt, the kind with the contrast collar, hair that had been styled by someone who charges by the hour." And then, while still shaking my hand, his eyes left my face. They went up, along the staircase, across the open beam of the ceiling. They went left, down the western wall, the floor-to-ceiling windows with the water behind them, and they didn't pause at the view, which is what every guest in 3 years has done, stopped dead and stared at the water. His eyes skipped the water entirely. They traced the window frames. They crossed the fireplace, the kitchen island, the hallway toward the bedrooms, and they moved the whole time at a steady, sweeping, appraising pace. And I stood there with my hand in his hand and realized I had seen that exact eye movement 61 times in 4 years. It is the way an evaluator enters a property. It is the way I enter a property. Guests look at a house. Buyers look at a house and imagine living in it. But there is a third way of looking, flat, rapid, inventory taking, that belongs to people who are imagining the listing. He was measuring. Standing in my entryway, 11 days married to my daughter, still holding my hand, he was doing comps. "This is stunning," he said finally, and he meant it, but not the way a guest means it. He meant it the way an investor means it. "Thank you," I said. "Let me make up the guest room." You may be wondering why I didn't simply say no. No, you may not stay. There are 4 hotels within 20 minutes. Honeymoons are for honeymooners. I have asked myself the same question, and the honest answer has 2 parts. The first is 23 years of training that does not undo itself in 3, no matter how many sunsets you watch alone in triumph. The reflex to accommodate is a deep groove, and it engages before thought. The second part is colder, and I'm less proud of it, but it's the truth. Somewhere in those first first 90 seconds watching his eyes skip the ocean to examine my window frames. A small quiet alarm had started in the back of my skull, and some older, stiller part of me decided it wanted to know what this was before it decided what to do about it. You learn more from a man who believes he's welcome than from one who knows he's been seen. So I made up the guest room. I put out the good towels. I played the part I have played professionally and personally for most of my life. The accommodating woman, the remarkable host, and I watched. That first evening, I cooked. Of course I cooked. Roast chicken, white beans, a salad with shaved fennel, bread I'd made 2 days before. My daughter poured herself a glass from one of my 9 saved bottles without asking, the third best one, a small mercy, and settled into my couch with the proprietary ease of someone who had already, in her head, moved in. Her husband took a phone call on my deck, pacing the length of it, and through the glass I watched him pause twice, mid-sentence, to look down at the deck boards, not at the view, at the boards. Checking, I'd have bet my house. For rot. I'd have bet my house. Listen to me. That's exactly what I was doing. I just didn't have the language for it yet. At dinner, the pitch arrived. It arrived the way these pitches always arrive, dressed as concern, wearing my daughter's voice for the opening act. Mom, she said, swirling her wine, we've been talking, and don't take this the wrong way, but we worry about you out here. Out here, I said. Alone. It's so isolated. What if something happened? What if you had a fall? I am 54. I do 90 minutes of yoga on that deck every morning, and I carried both of their suitcases up my own staircase 6 hours earlier because her husband had a call. But I have learned that when people are reciting, you let them finish the recitation, because the prepared text tells you what they want, and the stumbles tell you who wrote it. A fall, I repeated. It happens, she said earnestly. And the upkeep on a place like this at your, eventually. And there it was, the stumble. The place where the script said, at your age, and her love for me, which is real, choked on it. Her husband came in smoothly over the gap, the way a man does when he has written the script and rehearsed the woman. What she means is, we think there might be a version of this that gives you the same lifestyle with none of the burden. He set his fork down and made a small steeple of his fingers, and I swear to you his voice changed key, dropped into the register men reserve for boardrooms and for women they've decided are elderly. I work in the acquisition space. Coastal product like this is, frankly, it's exceptional right now. Properties like yours are commanding numbers that won't last. There's a structure where you'd transition into something more manageable. A nice condo near town, community, amenities, and this asset starts working for you instead of the other way around. Vacation rental income alone, properly managed, you're looking at very significant monthly distributions. Properly managed, I said. You wouldn't have to worry about a single detail, he said, and smiled. And the smile told me the sentence was supposed to be a gift. I want to record for the permanent record the 3 words that did the most work in that little speech, because I would hear all 3 again, later in other people's mouths, shaking. Structure, transition, distributions. Men like him do not steal. Stealing is for amateurs. Men like him build structures, and the structure does the stealing. And by the time you understand what you signed, the structure has been dissolved and reincorporated under a new name 2 states away. That's very generous of you both, I said, in a tone that sounded like genuine gratitude and was, I promise you, nothing of the sort. I'll think about it. He relaxed. My daughter beamed. Neither of them noticed that I had not agreed to one single thing, because people like this don't hear sentences, they hear compliance, and I had spent 23 years learning to make non-compliance sound exactly like its opposite. My ex-husband gave me many gifts, all of them accidental. That one I have come to treasure. The next morning is when the demands came. The ones from the hook, the ones you already know. I was at my stove at 7, making scrambled eggs for 3, when my daughter wandered in, phone in hand, not looking up. Mom, we should probably talk about expectations while we're here. Her husband was already installed at my kitchen counter with a tablet and an espresso he had not thanked me for, reading market coverage. My kitchen had become his office overnight. My counter, his desk, my home, his backdrop. What kind of expectations? I asked. He has a really specific morning routine. He's up crazy early for the East Coast. Calls start at 5 our time, so he needs breakfast at 4, like ready at 4. She said it the way you'd say the train leaves at 4, an immovable fact of physics. Nothing to do with her. Quiet house in the mornings, no TV, no blender after he's on calls, and good coffee. Like, actually good. He's particular. Breakfast at 4 a.m., I said. You're always up early anyway, she said, finally looking at me. And then she delivered the line that I will be quoting in my head for the rest of my life. And honestly, Mom, you love this stuff. The cooking, the hosting, it's like it's one of your strengths. One of my strengths. Like the labor of caring for my own home was a talent I should be grateful for the chance to perform. Like service was a hobby of mine they were generously accommodating. Her husband looked up from the tablet then, sensing the moment needed managing, and gave me the lobby smile. We'd be so grateful. You really are a remarkable host, as if I had invited them. And here is the moment the hook already told you about, so let me give it to you from the inside. I stood at my stove with a spatula in my hand, and I felt the old groove try to engage. The reflex, the accommodation, the 23-year-old yes. And underneath it, that older, stiller thing that had been watching since the driveway said, very calmly, he is going to put it in writing eventually. They always put it in writing eventually. Until then, give him exactly what he asks for. 4 a.m., I said, of course, I'll make sure everything is perfect. He smiled like he'd won something. He had just made the only demand I was ever going to need. They went into town that afternoon. My daughter said something about exploring the shops. Her husband said something about taking some meetings on his honeymoon in a town where he knew no one. I waved them off from the porch like a woman with nothing on her mind, and I watched the SUV all the way down the road, and then I went inside. terrified, sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and did what any woman who has spent 54 years learning to pay attention to the things people don't say would do. I typed his full name into a search bar, added the words he used to describe himself, and started reading. I want to walk you through this part slowly because this is the part people skip when they tell stories like this. They jump from suspicion to confrontation like the middle is boring. The middle is not boring. The middle is everything. The middle is the difference between an old woman with a feeling and a witness with a file. The first layer was easy, which it always is, because men like him need a public surface to operate. A sleek one-page website for a capital group bearing his last name. Stock photography of a skyline he did not live in. The phrases premier, coastal investment opportunities, and white glove asset management. A headshot 4 years and 15 pounds out of date. No office address. A suite number that, when I mapped it, resolved to a mailbox store between a nail salon and a sandwich franchise. The second layer took the Secretary of State's business search, which is public, free, and the single most underused tool available to the American mother-in-law. I searched his name as a registered agent. 3 limited liability companies came back. The first had been formed 6 years ago and dissolved 14 months ago. The second had been formed 4 years ago and dissolved 9 months ago. The third, the Capital Group from the website, was 11 months old and listed as active. Now companies dissolve for innocent reasons every day. But there is a particular rhythm to serial formation and dissolution. A company born, used, and folded just as its obligations mature, its assets and its principals sliding cleanly into a fresh entity with a clean record, and 4 years of due diligence work had taught me to hear that rhythm the way a cardiologist hears a murmur. This wasn't failure. Failure is messy. This was hygiene. The third layer was a county record search 2 counties inland, where the second dissolved company had briefly owned things. A 12-unit apartment building, acquired with great press release fanfare, revitalizing community housing. And now, per the county docket in foreclosure proceedings, its tenants' deposits the subject of a separate small claims pileup I found in a local news brief. The brief was 4 paragraphs long. The 4th paragraph said the building's management company could not be reached for comment because it had been dissolved. And then the 4th layer, the one that made my hands go still on the keyboard. A civil suit filed 19 months ago in that same inland county. 7 named plaintiffs. I read the complaint twice, and then I printed it, because some documents you need to hold. 7 homeowners, ages 68 to 81. Each of them had been approached at church, at a senior center, one at her own husband's funeral reception, which is a detail I am still not over, by representatives of a property management company with an offer that was always, word for word, the same shape. You've got so much equity just sitting there. Sign the property into our management structure. We handle everything. Taxes, maintenance, tenants, and you receive guaranteed monthly distributions for life. Stay in your home or move somewhere easier. Either way, you never worry about a single detail again. You never worry about a single detail. I had heard that sentence, in that key, at my own dinner table, 19 hours earlier. The distributions came for 3 months, 4 months, 6, then they shortened, then they stopped. Then the letters started. Rent due to the management company on houses these people had owned outright for decades, because the thing they had signed was not a management agreement, it was a transfer, wrapped in 40 pages of structure. 2 of the 7 had already lost their homes entirely by the time the suit was filed. The named defendant was the second LLC, dissolved, and its registered agent, whose name I did not have to look up because his suitcases were in my guest room. The lead plaintiff was listed by name, and the complaint gave her circumstances with the brutal compression of legal writing. Widow, 71, sole owner and resident of her home for 38 years, induced to execute transfer documents under false representations, currently residing with relatives. 38 years. She had owned that house longer than I had owned anything, including, for most of it, my own opinions. I sat back from my desk. Out the western windows, the afternoon was doing its gold-on-water routine, the one I never get tired of, and I looked at it for a while and let myself feel, fully, for about 90 seconds, the thing underneath all the method. My daughter is married to this. My daughter brought this into my house and is upstairs in my guest room dreaming his dreams. Then I folded the feeling up, put it where I put things, and went back to work, because rage is fuel, but it is not a plan. There was one more thread, and I almost didn't pull it, and I will be grateful for the rest of my life that I did. In an archived announcement from a regional business journal, in the comments under his engagement era profile, rising figure in the acquisition space, a single comment, 2 years old, from an account with a woman's name. Ask him what happened to my catering company. That was the whole comment. It took me 40 minutes to find her. The name led to a defunct business page for a catering company 4 hours south, 10 years of 5-star reviews, a loyal-looking client list, photographs of beautiful food in beautiful light that had announced its sudden sale and closure 18 months ago. The timeline sat flush against the public record of his first divorce, which I had also found by then, the way a drawer sits flush when something has been forced into it. I wrote to her through the professional association, where her name was still listed. 4 sentences. I told her who I was. I told her who had married my daughter. I told her what I had found in the county records, and I asked if she would be willing to talk to me. I read it 5 times before I sent it, because I knew what I was really asking a stranger to do, which was to reopen the worst thing that ever happened to her as a favor to a woman she'd never met. Then I picked up my phone and called the lead plaintiff. Her number was not hard to find. She was living with a niece whose landline was listed. It rang twice. A voice said hello. Older. Careful. The voice of someone whose phone has not brought good news in a long time. I told her my name. I told her I was calling about the lawsuit, and there was a silence with a particular texture to it, a bracing, and so I said the next part quickly. I'm not calling for him. I I think he's about to do it again, to me. We talked for 51 minutes. I know because I looked at the call timer afterward and wrote the number down, the way I had started writing everything down. She told me about the church coffee hour where a polite young associate first mentioned equity. She told me about the folder of glossy materials, the guaranteed distributions, the lawyer's office that turned out to be rented by the hour. She told me the distributions came on the first of the month for 5 months, like clockwork, like fruit, and how that clockwork was the cruelest part of the whole design, because it bought her signature time to become irreversible. She told me about the morning the letter came addressed to her as tenant at the house where she had raised 3 children and buried a husband, and how she had stood in her own kitchen reading the word tenant and felt the floor she had mopped 10,000 times turn to paper under her feet. And she told me, this is the part I want you to sit with, that when she tried to tell people, the hardest part wasn't his lawyers. It was the way her own relatives' faces changed while she talked, the patient nodding, the gentle suggestion that maybe she'd misunderstood the paperwork. Once you're past 70, she said, confusion is the explanation everyone reaches for first. He knows that. It's not a flaw in his plan, dear. It is the plan. Toward the end, I asked how the lawsuit was going, and she made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Slowly, she said, the company was dissolved. The money was structured. His name was insulated behind the entity. Their lawyer was capable and outnumbered. What the case needed, what it had needed for 19 months, was a live pattern. Evidence that the conduct was ongoing, current, and personal to him, rather than buried in a defunct LLC. A live pattern, I said. Someone he's working on right now, she said. Someone who can put him in a room, making the pitch, in the present tense. I looked out my western windows at my deck, at my faded yoga mat, at the gold on the water. He's sleeping in my guest room, I said. Last night he made me the pitch at my own dinner table, and tomorrow morning at 4 a.m. I am apparently making him eggs Benedict. The silence on her end of the line changed texture again. When she spoke, her voice had something new in it, and it took me a second to recognize the something because I had only just reacquired it myself. It was traction. Tell me everything he said, she said, word for word. So I did. And then I asked her my one question, the one I had been turning over since the third layer of the search, the question this entire story balances on, and she went quiet for a long moment, and then she said yes. They came home at 6, loud and pleased with themselves. My daughter had a shopping bag. Her husband had the particular shine of a man who believes things are going his way. Over dinner, I made halibut. I am not an animal. He mentioned with studied casualness that they'd swung past a couple of local brokerages just out of curiosity, and that the curiosity had confirmed that properties like mine were trading well above where I'd have guessed. Honestly, the timing is almost unfair. The timing is almost unfair. Write that one down too. He talked for 40 minutes. He talked about opening up the floor plan for rental flow, about which interior walls were, his words, non-structural probably, about listing platforms and seasonal pricing curves and a cleaning crew he could have spun up in a week. He used we for decisions that were mine and your place in sentences about its disposal. At one point he stood, mid-monologue, walked to my western wall, put his hand flat against the window frame I had watched him appraise on day 1, and gave it 2 little pats, the gesture of a man checking the flank of a horse he has already mentally purchased. And I watched my daughter watch him do it with an expression of total, uncomplicated admiration, and that, of everything in those 3 days, was the sight that came closest to breaking my composure. Not the theft, the coat. She was wearing his certainty like a coat, and it fit her exactly the way the last one had, and the one before that. I cleared the plates. I said goodnight warmly. I told him breakfast would be ready at 4 sharp, every detail exactly as requested, and he said, "You're a remarkable woman," with the sincerity of a toll booth, and went up my stairs to sleep in my guest room above my non-structural, probably walls. Then I went to my desk, and I built the file. The corporate filings for all 3 entities, printed, with formation and dissolution dates highlighted, the foreclosure docket, the news brief with its unreachable, dissolved management company, the civil complaint, all 7 plaintiffs, with the lead plaintiff's paragraph flagged, the defunct catering company's sale announcement beside the divorce record, dates aligned, and on top, the email that had arrived at 9:52 that evening from 4 hours south, 3 paragraphs from his first wife, controlled and exact, describing how a business built over 10 years had been mortgaged, leveraged, and liquidated out from under her by structures she had signed at her own kitchen table because the man she loved told her it was all just details. Her last line, "If you need a statement, I will give you one. Just tell me what he was about to take from you." At 11:14 p.m., I filed a complaint with the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. The online portal walks you through it. It asks for documents and dates, and it gives you, at the end, a confirmation number, which I wrote on the inside cover of the folder in black ink. Then I printed the submission receipt and added it to the stack, because a folder that ends in a government confirmation number is a different genre of object than a folder that doesn't. One is an accusation. The other is a record. Then I texted a number 2 counties inland. Still yes? The reply came in 90 seconds from a 71-year-old woman who I suspect was no more able to sleep than I was. Still yes. My niece will drive me. We'll be there at 4. I set my alarm for 3:40, put the folder on the counter by the coffee grinder, and went to bed in my own house, where I slept, I want the record to show, extremely well. The alarm went off at 3:40, and I was awake before it finished its first bar. The kitchen was dark, and I moved through it the way I always do before sunrise, slowly, deliberately, by memory. I ground the beans fresh, the $40 grinder doing its small, honest work. I poached the eggs in barely shivering water. I whisked the hollandaise by hand, off the heat, on the heat, off again until it ribboned. Eggs Benedict, good coffee, a quiet house, every detail exactly as ordered. I am genuinely good at this. That was never the question. question. For 23 years, the question was who it served. And this morning, for the first time in my life, the answer was me. At 3:58, headlights swung into my driveway and went dark. I opened the front door before they could knock. The niece came up the walk first, protective, scanning me the way you scan anyone who has summoned your 71-year-old aunt to a stranger's house before dawn. And behind her, small and straight-backed in a wool coat buttoned to the throat, holding the strap of her handbag with both hands, came the woman herself. At exactly 4 a.m., she crossed my threshold. She stopped just inside the door and looked around my entryway, the staircase, the beams, the dark glass with the dark water behind it. And then she looked at me and said quietly, 38 years, mine had a porch swing. And I said, I know. And that was the whole conversation. And it was enough. We set the table together. 3 places. My best china, because the occasion had finally arrived for it. I poured her tea. She doesn't drink coffee anymore, she told me. The smell of it reminds her of signing things. And she chose the chair facing the staircase, folded her hands around the cup, and composed herself into a stillness I have thought about every day since. 40 minutes she sat like that. Not nervous, not vengeful, patient, the way stone is patient. At 4:50, we heard him on the stairs. He came down in a silk robe, hair somehow already managed, lifting his chin to take in the smell of the coffee. And for 3 full steps, he was a man whose plan was assembling itself perfectly. The breakfast appearing on schedule, the household already trained, the remarkable host performing her strength. He reached the bottom of the stairs. He smiled at the table. Then his eyes found the third place setting, and the woman sitting behind it. Hello again, she said. You remember me. I have watched a lot of faces in my life. I have never watched color leave one that fast. It went in stages, like a tide going out. The smile first, then the certainty under the smile, then the whole architecture of charm, until what was left standing at the foot of my stairs in an expensive robe was just a calculation, running fast and finding nothing. He looked at her. He looked at me. He looked at the folder I now slid down the counter to rest beside his place setting, the filings, the docket, the complaint with her paragraphs flagged, his first wife's email, and on top, in black ink, a state confirmation number. There's been, he started, and the voice came out half a register high, and he heard it himself and stopped and rebuilt it. There has been a serious misunderstanding. Sit down, I said pleasantly. Your eggs are getting cold. He did not sit down. He never touched the coffee. He said the word misunderstanding twice more and the word complicated once, and each version was thinner than the last, because that is the property of stories that were never designed to survive an eyewitness. The woman didn't argue with him. She did something far worse. She simply kept looking at him with those patient hands around that teacup, present tense, undeniable, 71 years old and 4 feet away. And under that look, every structure he had ever built dissolved like the LLCs, quietly, by design, leaving no one to be reached for comment. He was up the stairs and back down with his suitcase in 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my own stove, in my own kitchen, and I have never enjoyed 11 minutes more. He left without saying goodbye to his wife of 10 weeks, which was the most honest thing he did under my roof. He also left his phone on the counter, face up, already buzzing. My daughter came down at 7 to a quiet house, a cold breakfast, and a small white-haired stranger who rose, took her hand in both of hers and said, sit down, sweetheart. I'm going to tell you about my porch swing. And my daughter, to her lasting credit, and it is the credit I cling to, sat down and listened to all of it, and did not once say misunderstanding. She just kept looking at the door he'd left through, doing, at last, her own math. The investigator from the State Attorney General's office arrived at 9:00, a calm woman about my age with flat shoes and a recorder, who accepted coffee, declined eggs, and laid a card on my counter. My 11:14 p.m. filing, it turned out, had not started anything. It had completed something. They had been building a file on him for 2 years, across 2 counties. Ever since the lawsuit, they had the dissolved entities, the laundered structure, the pattern, but the pattern was historical, insulated, arguable. What it had needed for 2 years was him in a room, making the pitch, in the present tense, to a witness who wrote things down. You understand what you have here, the investigator said, paging through my folder, stopping at the dinner table notes I had reconstructed word for word. It wasn't a question, but I answered it anyway. A live pattern, I said. The woman at my table smiled into her tea. He was served within the week. His own, which he never came back for, went into an evidence bag, still buzzing. The civil case 2 counties over has a new hearing date. The 7 plaintiffs have a new exhibit. His first wife's statement is part of the official record now. 3 controlled paragraphs that I'm told are devastating precisely because they are controlled. And before the niece drove her home that first morning, the woman stood on my deck for a while, looking at the water, and said, I waited 2 years for one person to believe me. And I said, I believed you the moment you answered the phone. And she patted my window frame, twice gently, taking the gesture back. My daughter stayed 2 weeks, not as a guest who expected to be served, as my daughter. She did dishes. She took long walks alone and came back with her eyes red and said nothing. And I let her say nothing because I know that walk. She called a lawyer about an annulment on day 4. She never once mentioned property management. On her last morning, she stood at the door with her one suitcase and asked me the question she'd been circling all 2 weeks. Mom, how did you know? That first day, before any of it, I told her the truth. He measured my windows before he learned my name.